the Pacers just crushed the Knicks. Where do you want to start? Indy, greatest Game 7 shooting day in the history of basketball, or devastating day for the Knicks franchise?
How about this? I was expecting the Knicks to come back, so the Celtics faced the Knicks without Brunson with a broken hand.
I did have thought. Burks made a shot, and it got down to like 12. I started getting ideas. I was like, this is great. Imagine that happens. Russillo, I give up trying to understand Game 7s anymore, because this was the exact situation with a young team that we already saw look deer in the headlights in Game 5. And you figure MSG, crazy crowd, Knicks, they're going to get all the calls. I thought for sure the Knicks were going to win. I also thought OG Anunoby was going to be able to play 25, 30 minutes. I thought Hart was healthier than he looked in the game, although he was giving his best. And Hartenstein was kind of a sneaky injury that I felt like the announcers didn't mention as much. So it was a compromised Knicks team. At the same time, the shot making from the Pacers was, from the get-go, awesome. I think that's the best they can play, and they did it in Game 7 in MSG.
Yeah, they set a record, or at least the last 50 years. Kirk Goldsberry had the tweet out, 101 points through 3/4 of a Game 7, most in the Game 7 in the last 50 years. After the first quarter, they were at like 78%, and it actually went up to 81%. So they were 22 of 27. Halliburton, who I was a little worried about because of how bad he was in Game 5, he took 9 total shots, and there were still 2 drives in the first quarter, specifically the second one where he was at the rim and he just pirouetted in the air and threw it out.
Yeah.
So I'm like, whoa, dude, like what is going on with this? Because he had a couple of those plays in Game 5 where I'm thinking, well, that just means you're just not comfortable once you're inside the paint. And if anything, just take it and see if you get fouled. I mean, you know, you're their best player. Like, you have to go aggressively there. And then he finishes the quarter with 15 points. Siakam got off to a good start. They couldn't miss. So a huge credit to a team that I had no idea, just like you, what to expect. I was probably leaning towards, I don't know, man, some Game 5 hangover stuff in there. And it wasn't even close. They were a completely different team.
Yeah. So I think in-season tournament, stupid, but big game exposure with a big crowd, big audience, some pressure. And then I think that Game 5 really helped them. You know, watching this game today, how bad they were in Game 5, and they just didn't understand the urgency of the game. And I thought Halliburton, we talked about on this podcast, was a little deer in the headlights-y. Reading the stories about Carlisle coming out of that game, how he hammered them, made them watch the tape, all the loose balls they didn't go after. And, you know, I thought this was a great coaching job by him, because they came out with a pace. He was clearly like, Anunoby's going to play. He's not going to be 100%. Hart's not 100%. Brunson's banged up. Like, let's just go. Press the pedal. Go, go, go. If we're going to go out, let's go out like how we've played all year, which they did. And then they started making shots. You mentioned some of the they scored 39 in the first quarter, which was the highest in a Game 7 since 1998. At various points in the second quarter, they were 22 for 27 and 29 for 38. They finished halftime 21 for 26 from 2 and 8 for 12 from 3, 76% total. It was the best playoff shooting half in 25 years. And then even end of the game, they finished at 67%, Russillo. I went back and I looked up the best Game 7 shooting percentages ever. The number one was Phoenix in, it doesn't say what year that is, but it was 61% against the Lakers. OKC was at 60.9, and Boston against Atlanta in 88 at 60.8. So nobody had even done 62%, and they did 67%. Now, some of that has to be the Knicks, where, you know, Precious Achiuwa playing a ton of minutes. Burks is out there a ton of minutes. Hartenstein's compromised. Like, you could tell the Knicks weren't flying around, but still, like, just from pure shot making, pretty crazy.
Yeah, and then TJ comes off the bench and makes everything. And, you know, you can sit there and talk about like the offensive part of it for the Knicks. It wasn't bad. It's not like their totals were necessarily bad at the halfway mark when Brunson was still around. But, you know, we touched on it last week. You're not usually going to be successful as great as Brunson is. And this is an incredible run. And it's almost like in a storytelling version of it, fitting that his hand broke because you couldn't keep asking this person to physically do this and carry this team. His shooting hand broke too,
even better for the just for the narrative. It's important. It was the left hand.
And just to understand too, like, obviously I don't, but if you were writing out some story and it's like, okay, he's gonna play so hard that he actually breaks his shooting hand, you're not really built teams are not built to do this and be successful in the playoffs. And that's
Yeah.
what makes it this miraculous that we're even talking about a game 7. And who knows if he's still out there. A couple calls go their way. They got 2 quick fouls, the Pacers did at the beginning of the fourth quarter, and I was like, oh, I actually meant to ask you, can we Conspiracy Bill, if we're going game 7, Knicks Celtics, love that market, what happened? Does this one not exist as evidence that it doesn't happen?
I was banking on it. I thought for sure. It's tough, though, because when the Pacers are just making every shot they take, I think it's tough to give some 50-50 calls to the other team. It never really came into doubt because it was so clear so early on. But yeah, Conspiracy Bill was very focused on that.
I just like to keep track of the ones where everybody will be like game 7 MSG, Sunday afternoon, Boston, 2 markets. And then it's like, oh yeah, look at the Pacers are now in the Eastern Conference Finals. It's just weird too, because like making the Brunson point of if they had come back and then the Celtics get the Knicks without Brunson, it's like, okay, but on the other side too, like look what the Pacers have done. They faced Milwaukee with no Giannis and Dame, who missed 2 games. OG, who was a non-factor. And you're right. Like when you saw him in the beginning of this game,
oof.
And I know OG there's some stuff that came out when he had missed a bunch of games. It's like he's in no hurry when he's like 50-50 to come back and play. So you're like, is he really going to do that? And when he came out, you're like, okay, this guy is really hurt. Like even
he made a couple shots, and then they showed that wide shot from behind the basket of him being unable to shoot over on an open 3 when the Pacers had transition, and it made it 16-10. I wrote it down because I was like, oh, he can't even like jog to the right spot.
Yeah.
He was just incapable of like quick bursts for 8 feet.
That
was when you knew he wasn't come back.
Yeah, him making the second shot was like all I needed to see. And then because it was like he took this Hail Mary shot because he actually couldn't like get into his shooting pocket or whatever he wanted to do from that spot. It's like I might as well just go straight up and turn around and see if this goes in. And then you watch him off the ball, and then they subbed him out right there at like 6 minutes to never.
That was it. Timeout. Came back. When I mentioned the hottest shooting teams ever, it was the 06 Suns who had the record. The 2014 OKC, which was that great Durant team that really probably could have made the finals. And then the 88 Celtics, the last Bird McHale run. And then the 05 Suns. So 2 of the top 4 were Nash Suns teams, which the Pacers play a little bit like. But I was so impressed by Halliburton in this game. I noticed the same thing you did when he kicked it out that maybe the second time. I was like, oh,
it was the second one.
Back. If they can come back, maybe he'll get tight. But he went the other way. He started talking shit. When the guys start talking shit, now Tyson Fury is an example the other way of he was talking shit and then he got absolutely tagged and all of a sudden he was talking no more shit. But Halliburton, as this game was going, once he started talking to the courtside guys, I was like, okay, he's good. I don't know what happened to him in game 5. I don't understand it, but it's water under the bridge now.
Yeah, I think development-wise for him, the comfort level, like, I know we'll get to it, but like I look at SGA differently, even though they lost that series. I look at SGA differently now, and it's a huge compliment. And for Halliburton in this series, I know there's just been a lot that's gone on in his story for 23-24, but as I was kind of walking around today, like thinking about this game, I'm just going like, I don't know. I was like, man, I hope I don't see that again. I hope I don't see him on the road. But I mean, they came out and they didn't miss any shots. So all of it was easy. You never even had to, it was never like a point. They got it to 6 at one point, and I went, oh. And then just like that, it's like another 8-0 run. So there was never like Dallas and OKC had these extended stretches of those games because it was so tough at times where it was like, oh, it's 8 points. And then it felt like 3 days went by and it's like, now it's 6 points, This game had like 2 maybe moments. And if they were fires, they were immediately extinguished.
The big moment midway through third quarter, 77-70. Knicks got a stop with a little over 6 minutes left. Deuce had the cross-court pass turnover. Miles Turner 3, back up to 10. Brunson turnover. Tyrese layup. 5-second violation, bringing the ball back in. Neesmith layup. It was 84-70 in under a minute. And that was the Knicks' chance because the crowd was getting back into it. And I wanted to see the Pacers put in a position of, okay, you guys are going to get tight here. And it went the other way. And they were awesome. There was one point, my buddy Hench texted me, Neesmith, Nembhard, and McConnell were 17 for 18 shooting. at one point in the fourth quarter when your bench is doing that. One of the things I liked about this Pacers team was that when McConnell's like the rare bench guy that comes in and is just could not be less afraid and kind of relished the moment. But it was nice to see my guy Neesmith, who Brian Barrett texted me. It was like, boy, it would have been nice if Neesmith played in the 2022 finals. Still a sore spot for the stealth loser Celtic fans like me and Brian Barrett.
I think that's a
buried Neesmith.
I don't know. That's kind of a big assumption. Neesmith was going to be the difference against the Warriors 2 years ago.
Just saying. It reminded me that they couldn't get him off the bench.
About that.
It was a fair point.
Think about that exercise, though. Like you're projecting.
This is what I do with losses, Russillo. Don't take this away from me.
You get 24 Neesmith, who up until like, I don't know. I mean, felt like for a week plus, I was like, yeah, what happened to this guy's shooting?
Yeah.
And I think he watches like Tom Amansky fouling videos, but they're put up by Cat. So it's like Cat Amansky. It's like this
from Tom Amansky and Karl Anthony Towns.
Right. How to always be in foul trouble. So yeah, I don't, whatever. I mean, we're making some, but he was good. He was really, really good. He started 7-7. So, I mean, what else can you ask for him on top of like, there was some clear, there was two big coaching things throughout this where you were like, how come they can't get Burks a few minutes? And clearly, I don't know if the series goes the other way, if Tibbs is willing to trust a guy who actually has been around, is a consummate pro. I had another team texting me while it was happening being like, what's fuck?
He doing? Yeah.
Yeah. Like,
this is stupid.
And if you know anything about Burks, like he's been around enough that he's not going to like freak out. I mean, as much as I love Miles McBride, he had a layup attempt today. We were like, dude, have you not looked in the mirror? Like you weren't going to finish this layup at any point. So it's hard to really point to anything other than when the other team's shooting like that and Brunson goes down. Like, what did anybody expect?
Burks has one of those jump shots that he's like the guy in pickup where you just can't believe it's going in. There's just no arc at all. It never goes in clean. It hits like 2-3 parts of the rim. But when he started he made a couple of those in the second quarter, and it was exactly what the Knicks needed. The Knicks got to 55 points in the first half, which is kind of a nutty total when you think no Randall, barely any OG. Hartenstein wasn't getting any offensive rebounds. But going back big picture for the series, though, like if I'm a Knicks fan, I'm torturing myself about all the ways, that God hated us, basically. The Nembhard game 3 is the first thing I'm going to think of when I think back at that series, because they could have been up 3-0. That 3 was ridiculous. The whole play broke down. He was 31 feet from the basket.
He lost the ball.
He was 1 for 6 for the game. Nobody in the arena, literally not one person wanted him to take it. He made it, and Halliburton put his hands over on his head, walking to the bench like Thomas Hill, the Thomas Hill Christian Laettner game style, like just in disbelief that it went in. And if it doesn't go in, I think the Knicks win. They go up 3-0 for the series, and no team in the history of basketball has blown a 3-0 lead. So to me, it starts with the Nembhard 3. The no-show in game 5 was weirdly important because it allowed Carlisle to basically kick them in the ass. And then OG starting and not being able to move, I think, was big. In retrospect, I wonder, do you think they should have maybe brought him off the bench, used him as like this lurking boogeyman that you don't know where you're going to get? Because it was one of those things where they started him and within 6 minutes, like, okay, well, he's not going to be a factor.
My guess would be whatever stuff they do pregame to get him ready, then they don't want him sitting on the bench for 6 minutes.
You have to get him going. Right. Yeah. Makes sense.
He couldn't move. I mean, there was a cut off the ball, and then there was another 3 where, the one cut, he was screened, but he just was stuck. And then the other close. I mean, look, everybody watched it. I think he deserves credit for even trying to get out there.
Can we do the big picture on the Knicks fan base? This was the most beloved Knicks team since the Canby team. And then you think, like, I don't remember another basketball team just getting decimated like this as the playoffs were happening. Pretty unusual. Like, you lose Randall, you lose Mitch, you lose Bogdanovich out of nowhere. OG gets hurt. Hart in game 6, who was like kind of one of their superpower guys because you just play 48 minutes a game. And it was like, oh, no, he's fine. No, Tibbs, these guys, they're just conditioned to do this. Then he goes out. DiVincenzo was the only one who didn't get hurt. But I just think if you're a Knicks fan, small picture, that sucks. Thought we had a chance to play Boston. Big picture, the way the East was set with all the injuries you mentioned earlier, you're probably not going to get a better chance with this unit unless you make a trade, unless you can add a big ass piece to what you already have or some sort of substantial piece, because next year the East is going to be better. And I don't think this team, as constituted, I don't think it's realistic. The overachiever team is going to be probably less of a successful gimmick next year. Orlando will be a year older. The Celtics will be just as good. Milwaukee will be back. Philly will be different, but not what they were this year. And they're going to have to do something, basically.
We talk about this a lot, and I do think it's a good exercise of like how far a team makes it, and then just like, okay, is that who you think you are? You know, maybe Dallas getting there for a second time in 3 years puts more stock into them making it to the Western Conference Finals a couple of years ago, and they beat a Phoenix team that on paper was statistically better than the team that had been in the finals the year before.
Yeah,
and they just humiliated them and took their souls, and the thing's never been the same since. But you know, if you're thinking about like the 4 or 5 best teams, I don't know that any of us really had Dallas in that group, but now you look at what they did this year and you're like, this feels way more real as a Western Conference Finals participant. So that depending on which way it goes, depending on who you get, you know, feeling really good about their chances no matter who they play against, just because, you know, they have a lot of pieces and it's all come together and the defense has been better. It's like, you know, going into next year, I'll think about Dallas differently. With this year on the other side of the Boston line, I don't know what I would have thought about the Knicks. Well, I guess I can tell you what I would have thought about the Knicks and Pacers is that this was a mess. It's a mess of a conference. And, you know, Boston's going to have all of this time off, and their starters are rarely going to have like played together throughout all of this time. And we know the standard that they're held to, but like, do you look at the Knicks differently going into next year? Will you look at the Pacers? Now, granted, like, who knows? Maybe the Pacers shock the world here and take the East. But based on what we've seen so far, it just was like kind of last man standing. And I'm not sure how much that'll change like my ceiling thoughts on some of these teams.
One thing that's cool, and I don't know why teams don't do this more often when they're at least in the vicinity, was they made that Siakam trade, right? And they gave up a pick and they gave up some stuff. And, you know, it's like, okay, that's fun. Like they're pretty good now. They could potentially sign him long-term and make him one of their 3 best players. He was really good in the game today, especially the first quarter. I thought he had real purpose and was like trying to punish whatever the matchup was. And in general, like, you know, has been in some big games from his Raptors days. And he was the one guy they had, unless you're going to say TJ McConnell, who had at least been in some games where the hair on your arms are going to go up. But I look back at that trade and I feel like a lot of teams could add Siakam and a lot of teams talked themselves out of it for a variety of reasons, right? Like, I don't even know who else was in that mix. And then he was like, fuck it, we'll go get him. And he's a top 60 guy and he played really well today. And it makes me think, like, if they're being aggressive like that, I would expect them to keep staying aggressive. Whereas, like, you know, what does Cleveland do? Cleveland to me is the I don't know what's going to happen with him. It seems like Jared Allen's going to get traded and it seems like Mitchell's going to get traded and they'll rebuild around Garland and Mobley, they're shooters, and then whatever they get back in those trades. But that's a wild card team, and I think Orlando's a wild card team to me in the East. And I just assume the Knicks are going to go all in on somebody.
Orlando will have to be better. Like, I would just be shocked if Orlando isn't better. I don't think Franz is going to be just a bad shooter all of a sudden. I think this year, you know, I'm not telling you he's Steph, but they have the cap space. They'll probably overpay somebody and get aggressive just to go ahead and add him. Cleveland has to break up the Mobley Allen thing. They have to. And I don't know if it's a bit of fool's gold.
Well, and it sounds like the Garland Mitchell thing too. If the reports were correct, that Clutch was basically like, if Mitchell's staying, you got to trade Garland. Published report.
Yeah, no, you're right. I'm just trying to think, like, what would you rather do? Keep Garland or Mitchell?
I would keep Garland and Mobley, and I think Allen has real value that they could get a real piece back and maybe even a pick. And then I would trade Mitchell because I don't think he's going to stay. I just wouldn't believe him. I don't think he's going to stay.
So if he said, hey, I'll do the extension, you'd be like, okay, but what does that mean? We're just going to do this a year from now?
Has he said that, though? He has not said that yet.
No, he hasn't said it. I'm just saying, like, what if he came to you and said, okay, fine, I'll do the extension? Would you be like, Okay,
under the
but
Ryen Russillo rule of they're going to do
yeah.
the extension and then a year later be like, get me the fuck out of here. I don't know. I don't know if I would trust it.
I just have to see what those other like. We're all in love with trading all these guys, but I want to get back to your original thing on Siakam because I think it's worth diving into a little bit more. When the trade first happened, I was like, okay, well, do you know that you're keeping him? And the word was they knew that they were keeping him. So then when you look at the pieces, you're like, okay, that's kind of a no-brainer. I mean, I haven't always been the biggest Siakam fan because I think one year I had him like it may have been him and actually Donovan Mitchell as like the last spot for an All-NBA team.
Yeah.
But that's still even like whatever you think is wrong with Mitchell or whatever you think the limitations are for Siakam of closing a big playoff game. I think the franchise, maybe it's probably fan bases even more than franchises is just, okay, well, who do you want? Like you want somebody in the 7 to 8 range? You want somebody who's a top 10 player? So if you're the Pacers, you go, hey, we'll never probably get Siakam in free agency. So let's just go ahead and do this now. And let's figure out if he's happy with our place and wants to sign here. And the price really isn't that bad. I don't think teams get enough credit for being way more practical about the kind of player they can bring in. And if you're Indiana, that's probably the best you would do. So,
well, especially, I think we talked about this when it happened. There's 30 teams in the league, which means there's 60 top 2 player spots, which means you want to at least have 2 in the top 60. Like we do this Ringer 100 exercise that we vote on. And I think we did the last vote in April. I had Siakam as the 41st best player in the league, right? And there's no context other than just rank the players, right now, who do you think are the best players? So they had number 41 and I had Halliburton at number 20. So they have 2 of the top 45, then you get some luck in the conference. Then you get your bench to show up. Then you have a really good coach and all of a sudden you're in round 3. I think the one thing we've maybe learned from this year is that there's so much talent now that you can maybe sneak into round 3. Like that we're going to go through some of the stuff Dallas did that I didn't agree with half of it. But guess what? They had Luka. They leveraged a bunch of different assets, and now they're 2 rounds away from winning the finals. So, yeah, when you look at the big list and you think like the guys I had after Siakam were Jared Allen, Brandon Ingram, Trae Young, Jalen Green, Scotty Barnes, Darius Garland, DeRozan, Şengün, Drew Holiday. And then you get into the 70s, all of a sudden you're looking at Grayson Allen and Terry Rozier and Jaden McDaniels. Like it drops fast, So I like that they did it. I think they deserve a lot of credit for how they built the team. They didn't do that Turner Hill trade in when everyone was trying to bully them into trading them, those 2 guys for the 2 firsts. They made a really smart Halliburton trade. The Neesmith, like getting Neesmith for Brogdon, that worked out. A lot of their stuff worked out. They could have traded TJ McConnell at any point this season to a team that needed a point guard that kept them. So they did a good job. And I thought Carlisle was outstanding in the series.
Yeah, I didn't love how late he went from Nembhard to Neesmith because I just felt like it was obvious against
But at least he fixed stuff that wasn't working. Like we'll see some coaches like just stubbornly be like, nope, this is what we do. Like I liked how he fixed 6 and 7.
Yeah, you're right though, because Turner was weird because he was available forever, and then
forever
wasn't. Because I remember when the Celtics had the Hayward like sign and trade possibilities, there was like, okay, well, if it were the Pacers, because there was some interest there, like can Turner then be flipped somewhere else? And then it was like, yeah, the trade market for him isn't really that good, so they didn't just want to give him away. And look, they've done this without Mathurin, who I know is probably a little too single-minded at times, but man, like if you need somebody to come off the bench,
he's a rational confidence guy who would have helped in a game like today. Yeah,
because if you had other guys like Siakam comes out in the 3rd quarter and misses everything, which I think is still, I think he can be a little predictable with the way you have to defend him. And if OG had been healthy, then I think the Siakam story is a little different, even if I like ultimately the trade for all the reasons that we just brought up. I thought it was really interesting that Koulibaly was like, oh, yeah, he's easy to defend. And I was like, oh, wow. I'm like,
yeah, that was one of the rare, interesting player podcast things. Let's flip it forward to the Pacers, who are now somehow in the Final Four playing the Celtics. Looks like we're not going to get Porzingis for about 2 games. I really, who do you think the Celtics were rooting for by the time we got to game 7, knowing Anunoby wasn't healthy, knowing Hartenstein was banged up, knowing Brunson was banged up? I wonder.
I mean, come on. Brunson breaks his hand. Are you saying
No,
before we do that?
I'm saying
Yeah.
before Game 7.
I still think it's the Knicks.
Yeah, I don't
think
know.
this team. I think this team looked worn out, which is understandable.
Yeah. Well, when you're playing at the pace they played, just to pull out that Philly series and then just to be in even the position to be in Game 7 in Indiana, plus everything they did the second half of the year,
and based on
probably
just
not sustainable.
Ball movement alone, if you're defensively Boston going, hey, we have more big guys to throw at Brunson. We can go Drew. We can go Brown. We could even go some White, Tatum. Like we can, and then Hauser will come in and get switched to him twice, and he won't get past Hauser for the 2 times. And everybody's like, oh, that's right. He doesn't suck on defense. So it would have to be New York. I would rather play a team that, as great as Brunson is, say this guy's taking 30 shots a game. Okay, well, let's see what happens. They've been on this physical, grinded out pace now for a couple of weeks. Because at least, like the Pacers, you have to be locked in. They swing the ball, they move, the guys drive, and like there's a lot about their offense that I like, and there's not really a zero out there offensively.
I was texting with Doc Rivers about them, and he was saying they are they were the best team in the league at defending the first half of the court before you get into your offense. And he said this before the Knicks game because he thought they were going to give Brunson trouble just putting miles on him as he brought the ball up. And I thought they got better at that as the series went along. By the time we got to Game 7, even before Brunson got hurt, they were harassing him before he got the ball. They were harassing him as he dribbled the ball up. Turner would come up to midcourt basically to double him. So he had to think about that. And it felt like over and over again, they weren't even in their offense until the 14-second mark. And it's, it's the kind of stuff the Celtics seem to take 3-4 games in a series to even figure out like how to do little wrinkles like that. So we'll see if they can do it. Before we get Celtics Pacers, big picture on the Knicks. They have the 24th and 25th pick this draft. They have all their own firsts. They have a top 13 protected Detroit first that the protection just dropped for the next 3 years after that. They have a top 10 protected Washington first that drops to a top 8 and 26. And they have a Milwaukee first that's 1 through 4 protected. So they have the ability with the Bogdanovich contract, they can team option that, put $20 million on that. They can add contracts to it. They could get nuts and put Randall in there. They have a lot of options. And I really think they're going to get Mikal Bridges as the big target. I think that's who they want. I think they're going to try to overpay because I think they want those 4 Villanova guys together. And I don't think they want like a major star. I think they want somebody like that. So that'd be my prediction. Who else do you think they would potentially pursue?
You think the Nets would do that with New York?
I think if it makes 120 cents on the dollar, I just don't know why you want Mikal Bridges if you're going nowhere. Like that's a guy who should be on a good team. And on a team like that, unless you feel like you can get Mitchell or Devin Booker, which they're not getting Devin Booker. They're not. Now you start talking yourself into Brandon Ingram and people like that, which is not going to take you very far. If I were them, I would trade Bridges for more than he's worth and just start over with my Phoenix picks and whatever I got with the next thing. But that's just me.
Do you think the 27 unprotected Phoenix pick is more valuable today than the number 1 pick Atlanta has in 24?
Why do you ask?
I just was looking at different trade stuff for Atlanta's pick, which is always an interesting exercise. Because I think no matter however you do it, I always suck when I do them with you too, and I almost want to apologize after we tape them because you have more fun with it. And then as I work my way half through the fake trades, I'm like, that's stupid. Nobody would do that.
I like it though. You're a glass half empty trade idea guy, and I'm a glass half full trade idea guy. That's why we work so well at those. You're just like, nah, they won't do that. Nah, why would they do that? And I'm like, no, here's why they might do it.
I'm a glass overboard in a rowboat with no sail, lost at sea. I don't know that first of all, I think the New York Brooklyn thing is something you have to think about. And Bridges is awesome. I would love to have Bridges. I think his decline this year was like, all right, cool. You guys want to have Cam Thomas take 1,000,000 shots? Like, all right, whatever.
Yeah, right.
And when I thought about the Mitchell stuff with the Knicks, all the things in life that you want that you don't get, and you should be happy. Like, it just felt like they were finally going to get Mitchell. They didn't believe that there was another suitor. Cleveland comes in, and it's like, wait, somebody else wanted him. And then it opens up this Brunson story where it's like, well, that would have never happened. Okay. The most beloved Knick since the 90s guys. Some would argue even more so, which I think is a little aggressive. And now I don't want Mitchell anywhere near the Brunson thing. Even though I kind of default to like,
way, as you know,
hey, have more talent, have 2 on-ball creators, like that's what you want. But I think Mitchell is a tough one because I think it would take so much away from Brunson, even if you'd love to see Brunson have another on-ball creator. Like, that's what was so remarkable about this run is like DiVincenzo can do some things, but it's not like you're running the offense through him at any point. Hart's all complimentary. OG had some incredible moments where even he surprised me, but I think the overall package with him is that you're not going to just let him freestyle for multiple possessions an entire game offensively. So
what's that contract for you, by the way?
For OG, I'm sure that's probably, it's going to be a huge, scary number. And with his injury history alone. I guess I'm always surprised when people are like a little like taken back when I talk about like some of the OG limitations on offense. Where I'm like, well, do you not? Like, you don't see it, But
I think we did this a week ago talking about, I think he'd missed 120 games in the last 4 years. They dialed up his minutes in the playoffs and he made it 3 weeks and got hurt. Some guys just get hurt more than other guys.
Well, that's been his deal going back to college.
Right.
This is who he's been.
I always had that joke about LeBron. Like, if he landed the wrong way and his leg came off his body, he would just go over and grab it and put it back on and then be back in the game. Some guys are just wired differently. Thank you.
I look forward to it every time.
Thank you. I think it's the 4th time I've made it. Brunson ends, even though he had a bad game today, he still ends in 13 playoff games over 33 points a game for the playoffs. And it's still, it just sucks that it had to end this way. But unfortunately, sometimes that's sports.